Good evening. I hope you all are doing well. My name is Philip Clark, and I'm the founder and the president of Enable Special Needs Planning, where we believe that everyone has the ability to live a life of purpose and impact, and that is what special needs planning should be focused on. And I'm so excited to come back to you guys again to Alaska from Indianapolis, Indiana, where we are located, and share with you our message of what we believe planning really needs to be targeted on and focused on, and allowing our loved ones to live this life of purpose and impact that we believe everyone has that ability to have for their life, including your loved ones, including my sister. And if you haven't been able to watch the last webinar that we gave you guys last month, I would encourage you to go back and watch that, where we walk through each of the 5 areas of planning that we believe are so important to think through. And tonight what we're going to be doing is talking about the unique financial strategies and the unique financial considerations that each of us must think through when it comes to planning for the future of our loved ones. And I know this is a very top of mind topic to so many families that we serve. And this is one area of planning that, once we have a strong strategy behind, creates so much peace of mind for us and our future. And so I'm excited to share with you our take on financial planning and how it relates to your overall special needs planning process for your loved ones. And so if you remember my story, I'll give you a brief overview of what that is. So our view of planning comes from the influence that my younger sister Sarah has on my life, and seeing the impact that she has had on so many others in our community. And if you remember the story that I shared, when Sarah was born 30 years ago, the doctors didn't give my parents a congratulations. Instead, my parents heard, "I'm sorry. Your daughter has Down syndrome." And then over the next few weeks and months, these professionals, each one by one, gave my parents their limited expectations for Sarah's life. My parents heard things like, "Your daughter might not be able to ever ride a bicycle. Your daughter might not be able to ever be in a mainstream classroom. Your daughter might not be able to ever live independently." And there were so many other limitations that these professionals wanted my parents to believe about Sarah's life. And one of those things my parents heard was, most kids with Down syndrome usually don't learn to read. And you should expect the same, is what they heard. And I told you a story about how, if you fast forward 30 years later, Sarah today is now working in a 2nd grade classroom, where one of her many duties is tutoring the kids on their reading abilities. And in this classroom, she finds so much purpose to her lives because she is able to impact the lives of others on a daily basis. And this is what our focus of planning is focused on. We believe that planning should be focused on allowing our loved ones to live a life of purpose, to live a life of impact. And this is what the 5 areas of planning that we guide families through accomplishes for so many families across the country. But it all comes back to my sister and how we believe that she needs to have a plan of purpose and impact for her life. And that is what planning, we believe, should be focused on. And so for tonight, what I want to go through, I want to give you a brief overview of each of the 5 areas of planning that we talked about in the last webinar. And secondly, I want to talk to you about the 4 challenges to financial security, because there are 4 challenges that every single family faces in our country, but it's so prevalent to families much like mine, much like yours, when it comes to planning for the future of our loved ones and making sure that we're secure from a financial planning standpoint. And the 3rd area that I want to focus on is helping you understand and calculate how much money your child would need if you were no longer here. And I know for my family, this was a major concern. And so many families that we serve, they have this question of, how do we even begin thinking through this planning process? How much money would we need to leave behind? And we want to walk you through that. And the 4th topic that I want to cover this evening is talking about these special needs trusts versus the ABLE accounts and how they work together, because I know there's a lot of confusion with these 2 different accounts and how they play a part in our overall financial planning strategy. And lastly, we want to be able to give you our free ebook of how you guys can think through each of the 5 areas of planning, including the financial planning topics we're going to cover tonight, and give you more information about each of these areas of concern and help you develop the strategies that are unique to your family alone. So we're really excited to get going through this evening. And so if you remember from last month's webinar, there are 5 areas of planning that we believe are so important for families to think through in order to have the peace of mind of knowing that their child and their family is well prepared for the future. And I want to briefly go through each of these 5 areas of planning tonight with you. So the first step of the planning process is the vision plan. And the vision plan, I believe, is the most important step of the planning process, because this helps you identify why you are planning in the first place. And we've got to start with the why. That why is so important. And this vision plan describes what a great life for your child looks like. It includes your hopes and your dreams for your child's life. It includes your child's hopes and dreams for their life. For my sister, she absolutely should have a say in her plan. After all, it is her life. And your child should absolutely have a say in that when and if it's appropriate. And this vision plan is really the foundation and the backbone to our entire planning process. Because every single decision that we make throughout the planning process comes back to this vision plan and asks the question of, is this decision that we're making getting us closer to allowing our loved ones to live out this great life of purpose and impact? And so that's why I believe that this vision plan is the most important step of your planning process. And the second step of our planning process is a life plan. And the life plan helps you detail and document every important piece of information about your child. Details that likely only you as parents know. And we're talking about basic likes and dislikes, daily routines that are so important to your child. What are the doctors? What are the medications? What are the certain things in your child's life that are so important that if you were gone for a long weekend, that a babysitter or caregiver would need to know? Or if there was a more permanent transition, how would somebody step in to properly love and care for your child in the way that you would wish? The life plan helps you document every single detail that's important for you and your child to make that transition sometime in the future as easy as possible for your child. The third step of the planning process is the resource plan. And we all know it's going to take a team to allow our loved one's life to be fulfilled, right? So what services, what organizations, what individuals do we need surrounding us today and in the future to make sure that this vision of a great life can become a reality? It's so important to make sure we understand and are able to think creatively and think outside the box of what services we need to allow this great life to happen. And this is what goes on in the resource plan. And the fourth step of the planning process is the financial plan. And this is what we're going to be diving into tonight and discussing in detail. And so we're really excited to go through that with you. And the fifth step of our planning process is the legal plan. And the legal plan really helps you wrap everything together. Make sure that no matter what happens in your guys' life, the plan that you have created continues to move on forward as you as parents, as loved ones, wish. And so each of those 5 areas of planning are so important for you as parents, for us to think through in order to have the peace of mind of knowing that your child and your family is well prepared for the future. But tonight we're going to dive into the financial planning section, the 4th step of our planning process, and walk you through a lot of considerations that every single family we work with has concerns over. And so part of the financial plan is thinking about life's what-ifs. And those what-ifs meaning, what happens if you as parents aren't here tomorrow? What happens if you aren't able to provide the support for your child? How do we plan for that? But because we believe that planning should be focused on this vision plan and allowing our loved ones to live this great life of purpose and envisioning what this looks like, we know that planning needs to be focused on today. And so that unique view of planning makes the financial planning conversation so much different. Now we have to think about, what are we doing today? How are we being efficient today to allow for the opportunities, to allow for the things in our loved ones' lives that are necessary to allow them to develop the abilities and the strengths and the confidence necessary to live out that unique life of purpose and impact that they need to live this great life. And so we find that there are 4 challenges that every single family in this country faces when it comes to having security in their financial planning and in their lives, when it comes to how to plan financially. And these challenges are even more prevalent when it comes to helping families plan who have a loved one with special needs, who will likely need additional support throughout his or her lifetime. So I want to spend some time this evening talking through each of these 4 areas of challenges that every single family faces and what to do to overcome them.
So the first challenge that every single family faces is just understanding how to be efficient with the money that they currently have inside their system. And how can we be more efficient so we're not losing opportunity in the future? So many families that we talk to, without even knowing it, are bleeding so much money out of their financial model. And how can we deploy a strategy that's going to find those inefficiencies in their system and be able to redeploy that back inside their system to make them more efficient? And that is our first step of our planning process when we guide families through our financial planning step, is how do we make you as efficient as possible so that all of your goals can be met? And like I said, so many families are bleeding money out of their system by just being inefficient in what they're doing, whether it's because they're paying taxes wrong, or they're paying down their debts wrong, or they're paying too much money for their insurance or other fixed costs that they have in their system. How can we find those inefficiencies and redeploy that money back into their system? And so a quick example to show you what I mean by that. What if we found $100? $100 doesn't seem like much, right? But what if we found a way to find $100 in your financial model that we could then save and put back in to work for you? So there's really 3 options we have with that. You could take that $100 and let it get absorbed right back into your lifestyle. It's pretty easy to find ways in our lives that we can spend extra money on. And so what happens if you had a new pair of sneakers, for example, that you wanted to use this $100 on? Obviously, the future opportunity for that $100 is now zero because you have spent that money. What happens if we look at option number 2? What if we wanted to be better stewards of that money and save that money for our future? What if we could find a high interest earning savings account, possibly a CD that was giving us 2% back on our money? What does that look like in 30 years? And then option number 3, what if we would invest that money into a market that was a right fit for you and your family, and over the course of 30 years, we were to make 7% on that money? So obviously we said in option number 1, the opportunity for any future growth is now zero. But if we look at option number 2, if we were to save that $100 in the bank and we were to earn a 2% interest, that money in 30 years would be close to $200. We have almost doubled our money in the future. But what happens if we look at option number 3? What if we're being as efficient as possible? We find that $100 and then we put that into an investment that's going to work for us now. So as we see in option number 3, that $100 in the course of 30 years making 7% interest, we almost have $800. And so finding ways in our model every single month to be as efficient as possible over the course of 30 years, of a long time period, the additional assets that we can have are substantial. But we've got to start with finding the inefficiencies in what we are currently doing. And like I said, so many families are bleeding money out of their financial system without knowing it. And so looking at how we're paying taxes, looking at how we are paying down our debts, finding ways to be more efficient in our fixed costs, like our insurance. These are all ways that we help clients make better decisions and be more efficient with their funds. And the second challenge that families face as they're planning for their family's future from a financial planning standpoint is really understanding the rules that every single financial institution has for your money. And no matter what we're talking about, whether it's your 401k or your different insurances, every single institution has rules that we have to follow. And there's nothing we can do about these rules, but we have to understand these rules so that we can develop strategies on how to make sure that we come ahead at the end. And so let's just take your 401k, for example, as we're going through each of these 4 rules. So the first rule is they want your money. I don't think it's any shock to anybody that a financial institution makes money when you put money with them. So they want your money and they want it as much as possible. The second rule is they want it systematically. You don't have to write them a check every single week out of your paycheck to go into your 401k. They make it very easy for you. So they want your money and they want it systematically. And they want to hold on to it for as long as possible. They don't want to give it back to you. There's rules in place that you can't touch your money until you're 59 and a half within your 401k. That rule was not designed for you. It was designed for the institutions. And then lastly, they want to give it back to you as slowly as possible. So every company will have ways to incentivize you to slowly take that money out of that account in retirement. And these are true if any single institution that we are talking about. But when it comes to special needs planning, if we look at that, if we look at the government rule that states your child cannot have more than $2,000 in his or her name. That's a rule that we have to follow. But are there ways that we can develop strategies of getting around that so that your child still has the assets that will allow him or her to live a great life? And we all know that there's the ABLE accounts and there's a special needs trust that we'll get to in a little bit. But every single rule that financial institutions have for our money, we have to understand those rules so that we can come out ahead in the end. And the third challenge that I find families face as they prepare for their family's financial future is just thinking differently about money. Thinking about money in the way that these larger institutions think about their money. And if you think about a bank, for example, how does a bank make money? If you put $100 into your account, they don't let it sit. They take that $100 and they loan it back out to somebody else. And that movement of money allows banks to be very successful. But what do banks tell you to do with your money? They tell you to let it sit, save it, be a good steward of your money, right? We've got to start thinking differently about money in the ways that successful financial institutions do if we are going to be successful with our future as well. We've got to think differently than what others have told us to do in the past. So how do we think about this movement of money and allowing $1 to do multiple things? Because you as parents have so many different goals for your future. You have goals for your own retirement. You have goals for your other kids and their education and their future. You have goals for your child with special needs and preparing him or her for a successful future. You also have other long-term goals and short-term goals and mid-term goals. We have got to think differently about money if we're going to allow all of these goals to happen. And we do that by trying to figure out how we can make $1 accomplish multiple things. And that really leads into the next challenge that families face is just being organized. Because if we look at all the different goals that we have that we want our money to do for our future and for our family, we have to know how everything is working together. And we have to be efficient, but it starts with having a plan and understanding where the moving pieces are. And so I often give the example of a chessboard. It's impossible to play the game of chess if we don't have a board, understanding where the boxes are. And it's also impossible to play the game of chess if we don't know where the pieces of our chess board is. How do we know what moves to make unless we can see the entire picture of what we're doing? And so many families that we work with come in to our office, or we have a video conferencing meeting and they share with us that their organization tool is the file cabinet or the shoebox, where they keep all of the information about their entire family, but also about their child with special needs and their future. And so we help families get organized in what they're doing so that they can see the big picture of what these strategies are going to do, not only today, but in the future. We want to help educate and organize our families so that they know what strategies are implemented and why they are. We want them to understand the strategy, and it starts with being organized and understanding how all of these pieces fit into play so that all the goals can happen, so that we can make $1 do multiple things because we're being efficient in our planning process. And what we find stems from this lack of organization is the lack of financial coordination. We find that on average, we as Americans work with 13 different financial institutions and how our financial picture is made up. And if you think about your 401k, think about your car insurance, your life insurance, your IRAs. The list goes on and on and on. And you can quickly see how there are probably 13 different financial institutions that you work with. So when is the last time that each of those representatives from those companies sat down at your kitchen table to discuss how their independent strategies were working in coordination with your overall plan? The answer is never, right? That has never happened, and it's never going to happen. But we've got to make sure that each of these independent decisions are working together towards your goal. And this is what being organized will allow us to do. So we at Enable sit down with the family, and we are the quarterback. We help make sure that each of these different decisions that we're making are all coordinated and are all aligned with your overall goal for your family and for your child and your entire future, so that all of these goals that you have can become a reality. And so the next step on our agenda is going to be discussing, helping you understand how to calculate the amount of money that your child would need if you were no longer here. And this is a question we get from families all the time, is how much do we need to plan for? How do we even begin calculating that number? And so I have sent you guys a link to a online calculator worksheet that you can fill out with your numbers. And I would encourage you to sit down and have discussions of what these monthly expenditures would be for your child now and in the future if you weren't here. And this calculator that I sent over is very detailed, but here you can see a basic calculator of what we're looking at. And this is just a sample client of that we have taken through this process and the numbers that they actually gave us for their son. But when we discussed how much money he would need, if you see, he would need $1,200 for his monthly housing expenses, another $800 for his transportation. He has personal expenses, and over time things break down and things need replaced. We've got to factor that into the equation as well. And so we look at what this family said that their son would need in the event that they weren't there. Their son would need $3,000 a month to live the life that they want for him. And their son is 15 years old and has a life expectancy of 75 years. So we're looking at needing 60 years of income of that $3,000 a month. So we need 720 months of that $3,000 per month before we even count in inflation and what that does. So this is a first step of helping you understand how much money we're going to begin needing to plan for in order to give you the peace of mind, and your child will be provided for no matter what. And so if we look at what that equates to, we're needing $2.1 million of assets, of income coming into your child's financial life, financial picture over the course of their lifetime. Now, this isn't to say that we need to have a bucket of $2.1 million today. We just need to have the asset that allows that money to come into your child's life when it's needed. And every family's numbers are going to be different. And every family's scenario and situation of how we're going to solve that puzzle of how do we find those assets that are going to be available at the right time. The strategies of getting there are different too, but we help families every single day find ways that are unique to their strategies and what they're currently doing to help make sure that that money is there when their child needs it. So many of you likely already have strategies of how you're going to provide your child with the assets that they will need for his or her future. You might have already had those conversations. Some of you might not have had those conversations, and that's something that's very important to begin thinking through and understanding. How are we going to allow that money to be there when it's needed? But we face a dilemma, right? Because in this previous example, I shared with you that the family needed total assets of $2.16 million to be able to give their child the life that they wanted if they were not here tomorrow. But then we just talked about the rules that are imposed on us that say that your child can't have more than $2,000 in his or her name without sacrificing the government benefits that are so beneficial to our loved ones. So how do we do this? How do we approach this problem of having such a large gap of the assets that we need versus the assets that the government allows us to have without losing these government benefits? How do we do that? Well, one option that we have is to open up a special needs trust. And a special needs trust for basic purposes is a vehicle that's going to allow us to shield assets from those government benefits so that your child can have more money available to them than just the $2,000 limit that we talked about. And so a special needs trust is set up for a person with special needs so that they can still receive those government benefits while still having supplemental income to give them the life that you as parents would want them to have. And there are three main types of special needs trust that we can look at. One is a first party trust, and this is when your child would actually open up a trust in his or her name. And this usually happens after a settlement, after an accident, or somewhere where there's a large windfall of money that we need to protect right away. The most common special needs trust out there that most of you are probably familiar with is a third party trust. And that is when you as parents or loved ones or guardians would open up this trust for your child. And then the third option for special needs trust is a pooled trust. And the different ARCs across the country have pooled trust, but there's a lot of organizations that will help families pool the assets together to make certain costs cheaper, to make certain decisions from a record keeping standpoint more efficient. And so neither is right or wrong. It's all about what is best for your family, and we'll get into more details in that in just a second. So the second option we have in shielding assets from these government benefits is to open up an ABLE account. And these are relatively new, and I know there's a lot of confusion and question that a lot of families have across the country that we have answered for families. So I want to spend a little bit of time going over these ABLE accounts and then comparing the two. But in basics, an ABLE account is a new account that individuals with disabilities and their families can open that are tax advantage, similar to how a 529 college plan would work and operate. And one difference of the ABLE account versus a special needs trust is that the beneficiary of the account, your child, is also the account owner. So your child will open up his or her account. And there's many different benefits in this, but one of the main benefits is any of the income, any gains within this ABLE account are not taxed. So if you think about, again, how a 529 college savings plan operates, it's very, very similar to that. One difference is there might not be state tax advantages of putting money into an ABLE account. But states vary, and different states have different rules and different regulations that they have within their states. Every state was required to create their own program based on what they wanted to see. So the main question that we get a lot in regards to special needs trust versus ABLE accounts is, which one do we choose? Do we get rid of our special needs trust, or do we focus everything in our ABLE account? How do we save accordingly? And so I want to give you guys a rundown of the differences between the two accounts, but every single family is unique in this. Every single family will utilize an ABLE account differently than a special needs trust, and the combination too depends on so many factors that your family has. But in a simple answer, neither of them replace each other. They are both very important in our overall planning goals and our planning conversations because they have different purposes and they have different uses and account limits that we'll talk about here in a second. So if we look at the cost between an ABLE account and a special needs trust, the cost of a special needs trust can be quite high. We need to get an attorney involved to draft a properly created special needs trust that will hold up in court, and that often can cost between $2,000 and $5,000, sometimes even more, depending on the complexities of this. But contrasting that to an ABLE account is relatively inexpensive. In most states, you can open up an ABLE account online with as little as $25 in that account. So from a cost standpoint, an ABLE account is a much more cost-effective way of shielding government benefits. From a tax standpoint, so the taxes in a special needs trust are earned as it is taxed. So every single year the account grows, those earnings are taxed every year. And comparing that to a ABLE account, in an ABLE account, the taxes grow tax-free. Remember, it's similar to how a 529 operates. And then looking at number 3, the amount of money within a special needs trust does not disqualify your son or your daughter from any government benefits. However, an ABLE account has no effect on the government benefits, the assets inside that, but it has a limit of up to $100,000. Now, the $100,000 mark still allows you to get medical benefits, but your SSI income will shut off after the amount inside this ABLE account reaches $100,000 or more. But SSI will turn back on immediately after that account dips below $100,000. So there's a couple different numbers we need to remember for an ABLE account, and $100,000 is one of those, because once you hit that, your SSI money will go away. Now, there's a lot of states trying to change that, so that is how it is today. There's no telling what the future will hold with that number. The uses for a special needs trust. They can be spent fairly broadly. We need different trustees and different people put into allowing those assets to be funneled to your child, but those uses are pretty broad. However, an ABLE account, the funds must be used for, and this is from the federal guidelines, it must be used for qualified disability expenses. But if you look at the qualified disability expenses, they also are quite broad as well. The ownership of the special needs trust. So a special needs trust is owned usually by a family member. If we're looking at a third-party special needs trust, which is the most common, you as a loved one, as a guardian, as a parent, you are the owner of this special needs trust. However, like I mentioned just a second ago, in these ABLE accounts, your child is actually the owner of the account. There's a little bit of complexity to accessing the funds for a special needs trust. And this is why I look at a special needs trust as more of a long-term investment, because if your child needs money to go to the grocery store, there probably is a better way, more looking at the ABLE account, to get money out, because there's a process involved in involving the trustee of this account to get money out. On the other hand, the ABLE account is very easy to access those funds. In fact, many states often have almost like a debit card that your child can access those funds with. So it's so much easier to access the funds from an ABLE account. The remaining balances. So a question we get a lot is, what happens if my child passes away? What will happen to those assets? So for a special needs trust, if it's properly set up, the funds that are remaining in that account, if there's a beneficiary, will go to that beneficiary. But this is a topic that's tough when in regards to these ABLE accounts. And this is one reason that a lot of families have not yet put money in an ABLE account, because it's not quite clear about what will happen to those funds after your child were to pass away. There's a lot of language in this that suggests that that money could be used to pay back Medicaid. Nobody knows for sure what's going to happen. There's a lot of groups trying to fight that. But as it stands currently, the language says those funds may be used to pay back Medicaid. And then lastly, the age eligibility to a special needs trust versus an ABLE account. There's no restrictions on the age that you can create a special needs trust. However, for an ABLE account, the disability has to be before age 26. So to start things off, we did a brief overview of each of the 5 areas of planning that we believe have to be addressed to have a comprehensive special needs plan. And we went into those a lot in more detail in our previous webinar. So if you didn't catch that, I would encourage you to go back and watch the recording of that we did for you guys. We spent quite a bit of time talking about the 4 challenges that every family faces in planning for their financial future when it comes to planning for their child, as well as planning for their entire family. And then we compared and contrasted some of these common concerns and questions that we get, mostly directed at the special needs trust versus the ABLE accounts, and how do those two work together, and what are the differences and similarities of those. We have this free ebook that we offered you guys last time that will go into so many more details about each of these things that we've covered today. And that will allow you to dive in and get all the details that you need that are relevant to you, your child, and your family. But I wanted to make sure that we left enough time to answer any question you guys have. I'm happy to stay on as long as you guys have questions to help guide you through anything that you need more clarity on, or more explanation on, or more specific details on certain aspects of financial planning. And there's a lot of questions that are tough to answer because every family is completely different. And so there might be some questions that I can't answer because I need more information. As you remember from last webinar, one of my frustrations with special needs planning was that it really was a cookie cutter type process. But as we all know, every single family is completely different, and the uniqueness of your family and your child and questions and concerns you have are going to determine the correct strategies for that. So there might be some questions that I can't answer, but I'm happy to stay on as long as you guys have questions to help give more clarity.